My great-grandmother had 4 last names. One of my retirement hobbies is researching and documenting my family's history. Over the last several months, I've spent hundreds of hours taking genealogy courses, listening to expert lectures, learning genealogical AI techniques, finding European archives and drilling into their online databases, and corresponding with other researchers. Also squinting at 100-year-old documents written in Polish, German, Dutch, and sometimes Cyrillic. Then I double that time annotating and writing it all into my genealogy software and computer file systems. Perla says that I spend more time in Galicia than in Toronto. My focus these last few months has been piecing together the backstory of Rzeszów, Jacob Riesenbach. Jacob was my dad's dad. Growing up in Winnipeg, I didn't have the opportunity to spend a lot of time with Rzeszów, who lived with my grandmother Bobbyita in Toronto along with the rest of that side of the family. However, our families visited each other regularly, and through my childhood, it allowed me to establish somewhat of a relationship and a connection with him. I came to know the basics of his life story, albeit without the deeper understanding that would come to me as an adult in later life. Jacob was a Holocaust survivor who came to Canada from Poland when he was in his 40s, along with his immediate family, including my dad, Joe. Jacob arrived in Winnipeg in 1948 after spending a few years wandering in post-war Europe and dwelling at a displaced person DP camp in Austria. It was always with trepidation that I would broach the subject about his life in Poland. I was hesitant to ask him to recall those years of hiding, fear, the loss, and the near-death experiences. In general, it wasn't spoken much in my childhood. But happily in later life, Jacob agreed to give several recorded interviews, which I later digitized and can be found on my YouTube Shoah playlist. The interviews largely focused on his experience during and immediately after the war. So, sadly, I still didn't have a clear picture of his life before the war. Rzeszów passed away in 1991. And so now, the answer to my many questions require electronic detective work to uncover the people and the events in his early life. And I thought I would start on researching Jacob's mother. Jacob was born May 10th, 1903 in the village of Siplice in southeastern Poland, about 90 kilometers west of what is now the Ukrainian border. At the time of his birth, Siplice was part of Galicia and was under the control of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. More than 1 million Jews lived in the broader territories of the empire, but the majority of them were in Galicia. In many towns, Jews accounted for a large proportion of the population. For example, according to a census in 1910, Jews accounted for 30% of the 55,000 residents of Przemyśl, a nearby city. Sadly, Jews across Galicia were a suppressed underclass. Despite Emperor Franz Joseph's emancipation of the Jews some 35 years before Jacob was born, Jewish marriages and births were commonly seen as illegitimate because they didn't happen under the auspices of the Catholic Church. From the perspective of the Polish authorities, virtually all babies were born bastards, and all Jewish couples lived together in sin. In order to legitimize a marriage or a birth, Jews were required to go to a government office and formally register. This not only cost money, Jews were charged an especially heavy fee for this privilege, but it also informed the government as to their whereabouts and family situation. This administrative data could be problematic down the road, as it gave authorities the knowledge to impose special taxes to conscript young men into the army or to control the growth of Jewish populations in an area. Thus, civil registrations of Jewish births and marriages weren't always done. Sometimes they were done years after the fact, only when such things as passports or legal documents were needed. Drawing on the valuable archiving work of several organizations that preserve Jewish history, I was able to find Jacob's birth record. The pictures you see is a digital image of a Galician birth ledger. The entry recording Jacob's birth is the last of the 4 rows on this double page. The entry is handwritten in German, the language most commonly used for government and business transactions at the time. The entry records his mother's name as Chaya Scheindel and his father's as Chaim Hersch. As for his parents' surnames, here's where things get complicated. There is an annotation in the right-hand side of his birth record in the column labeled Attention. The text says, Chaim Hersch Feldmaus acknowledges his paternity of the child. He consents to the child being adopted and recognized as his offspring. Signed by a witness, Berish Sprung. There is much that is noteworthy here. First, the annotation is written in Polish and is in a different handwriting than that of the rest of the text. While it's not possible to be sure, the language and the tone of the annotation implies that the note was written into the ledger sometime after the birth was recorded. And most notably, the annotation raises mysterious questions regarding the marital status of my great-grandmother and great-grandfather. Through conversations and recorded interviews with Jacob, I came to understand that there were mysteries surrounding his upbringing. In particular, there is the unexplained departure of his biological mother, Chaya Scheindel, from the family home about a year or two after he was born. This fact was well known in my family, but not spoken of too frequently given the sensitivities. I didn't know why Chaya Scheindel left, and I don't to this day. The recordings that I have of Jacob might contain some further hints of why his mother left, but it will take careful listening to the Yiddish that he spoke to tease out any further facts that might have been overlooked in my early listening. As they say in academia, this is a topic for future research. But what is going on here with this birth annotation? There could be a number of explanations to this cryptic note. The simplest interpretation is that Chaim Hersch and Chaya Scheindel were previously married in a Jewish ceremony, and this note merely documents that Chaim Hersch later, dutifully, registered Jacob's birth with the authorities. Another interpretation is that baby Jacob was conceived by the couple out of wedlock, and that Chaim Hersch and Chaya Scheindel are legally adopting him into their family now that they were formally married. Yet another interpretation could be that Chaim Hersch and Chaya Scheindel were never married, but that Jacob was indeed their biological son. A final and somewhat uncomfortable interpretation of this note could be that Chaim Hersch was not Jacob's biological father. Some other man was. And for some reason, Chaim Hersch felt the need to legitimize the child's legal status by legally adopting him. In this interpretation, Chaim Hersch is bringing Jacob into his home as a son, even though he's not the father. Without DNA testing, we may never know which of these is true. Well, what surname should baby Jacob have? In Galicia at the time, the doctrine was that was shared between the Austro-Hungarian authorities and our rabbinic tradition was that the mother was the only certain parent of a baby. Thus, it was a default position that babies were documented in legal records with their mother's last name. Later, if a father registered the child with the authorities and paid the fee, the child would be known by the father's surname. However, this policy merely kicked the proverbial can down the road. If a child is to be assigned his mother's last name, then what was the last name of the mother? Was the mother's last name the surname of her father or the surname of her mother? The answer is sometimes one, sometimes the other. Frequently both were used at different times and in different situations. By the way, this recurring issue of ambiguous surnames is a frustrating problem for doing genealogical research. Some focus can be had by also leveraging the first name of a baby's parent and the town they came from. However, given the Jewish tradition of naming a baby after a deceased relative, you could find multiple people with the same first name and the same last name from the same town, but born at different times. So that brings us to Jacob's mother, Chaya Scheindel. Chaya Scheindel was born in Kiryloka, Poland in 1878. Kyriloka is a rural area located just to the northeast of Liepzig. The picture you're looking at is a digital image of a nearly 150-year-old ledger recording my great-grandmother's name, Borer Chaya Scheindel. The ledger book is an index. It lists the names of Jewish children born in a particular region and a particular year, along with reference to a page on a separate ledger book where the full record of the birth can be found. This full record would contain an additional administrative and family details, as we saw in Jacob's birth record. Organizations such as Jewish Gen, Gesher Galicia, JRI Poland have undertaken multi-year projects where trained experts digitize historical records such as these. Moreover, they translate and organize the information so that researchers such as myself can search for names of individuals or towns in their databases which reference the original digitized documents. Their work is invaluable. Without it, the only way to gather this kind of information would be to physically visit each and every archive with an interpreter by your side. Many thousands of ledgers such as these have been digitized by these Jewish organizations. However, there are many thousands more that sit in dusty cabinets in municipal offices and national archives that have not been digitized or haven't been published. Over the years and over the wars, many historical ledgers have become lost despite the preservation efforts. Sometimes a detailed birth ledger has been lost and only its birth index ledger exists. This might be the case for the birth record of Chaya Scheindel. To date, I have not been able to find the full birth record of Chaya Scheindel, just this index ledger referring to it. However, through other means, I've been able to piece together a few facts about Chaya Scheindel and her parents. Chaya Scheindel's father was named Abraham Moses Riesenbach, and her mother was Zelma Leah Borer. Abraham Moses was born in 1858 and was a businessman, according to his death record that I have in my files. He lived in Kyriloka and he died in 1932 at the age of 74. Zlata was born in 1859 in Kyriloka and died in Rzeszów in 1894 at the young age of 35. Abraham Moses and Zelma Leah had 3 children together before she passed away. Besides my great-grandmother, Chaya Scheindel, born in 1878, they had David, 1887, and Sarah, 1891. I have reasonable confidence that Sarah was indeed Zlata and Moses' daughter, but I am not completely confident that David was indeed their son. My conclusion is based on circumstantial evidence that I'm hoping will be confirmed through information from a German archive that I've requested and I'm waiting for. What you see in front of you is the family tree of Jacob Riesenbach, his mother Chaya Scheindel, and his father Chaim Hersch. In any event, Chaya Scheindel gave birth to her son Jacob in Supplice in May of 1903, a mere 20 kilometers away from her own birthplace. Chaim Hersch Feldmaus claimed paternity for the boy, and I presume, perhaps naively, that they lived together as a family for a time in the nearby town of Rzeszów, Poland. My collection of documents includes a record listing Chaya Scheindel as having the last name Borer, and other documents where she has the last name Riesenbach, and yet other documents where she has a fourth last name. Stand by. I have not found records where her surname was recorded as Feldmaus. That could mean that no such document exists, or it could mean that I simply haven't found it yet. Or it could mean that she and Chaim Hersch were never formally married according to the local civil authorities. But it is conceivable that at some time in her life up to 1903, she went by one or more of these 3 surnames: Borer, Riesenbach, Feldmaus. Also of note is that Jacob, my grandfather, took the last name of Riesenbach. On more than one occasion he was recorded as saying that it was my mother's name. It was his mother's name. I have records where officials document his surname and those of his wife and children as Feldmaus, but he never himself used that last name. For reasons that are not clear, Chaya Scheindel left her son Jacob Riesenbach, and notionally the father of her child, Chaim Hersch, within 3 years of Jacob's birth. My research places her departure sometime between mid-1903 and mid-1906. The next chronological record that I have that refers to Chaya Scheindel is from the city of Rzeszów, 60 kilometers away from Shinyawa. The digital image you're looking at is a page from a Jewish birth ledger which lists her as the mother of the girl Zelma Leah. Zelma Leah was born December 23, 1906. The German handwriting in the column for the mother of the baby reads, Chaya Scheindel Riesenbach from Rzeszów, daughter of Moses Riesenbach and Zlata Leah Borer from Krylowski near Leipzig. The name of her town is illegible. Mysteriously, the column for her father's name, occupation, and place of residence is blank. However, there is a fascinating annotation in red ink in the attention column of the birth record. Thanks to help from a viewmate, a volunteer, from Jewish Gen, I was able to have that red ink translated. The red ink was written in Polish sometime after the birth of Zelma Leah. It is an official directive from the Lvov Voivodeship and the Starstrow district office. It asserts that Chaya Scheindel Riesenbach, the mother of the child, her surname is Borer, and that she is the daughter of Zlati Borer. Further, it mentions Meyer Schumer, who is Przyznana si, or confessed or admitted, to paternity of the child. The text refers to a file number of a particular Jewish marriage registry from 1913, and the text concludes by asserting that the child's legal status is thus legitimized. When I first saw this document, I was flabbergasted. My great-grandmother had a child with another man soon after leaving her first husband. With this birth record, I had hard evidence that after leaving her firstborn son and home in Shinyawa, Chaya Scheindel went to live in or near Rzeszów, and in 1906 she got pregnant and had a child that same year. Adding to this new chapter of her life, I have found 2 other records from this period mentioning Chaya Scheindel. Both are birth records. Her son, Yona Symcha, was born July 14, 1908, and another son, Judah, was born December 19, 1909. Both of their birth records have the same bold annotation in red ink. Both assert that Meyer Schumer married Chaya Scheindel in 1913 and has claimed paternity over the children, thus legitimizing them. Thus far, I've not located a copy of the marriage record of Chaya Scheindel and Meyer Schumer. However, these birth documents and a few others in my collection make reference to their civil marriage in Rzeszów in 1913. Many of the records I have of my ancestors list them as businessmen, tradespeople, farmers, furriers, inn operators, and the like. They were not wealthy people. They worked as farmers and in the trades, scratching out a living as best they could. Most of their Jewish neighbors were in the same socio-economic strata. Galicia was one of the poorest regions in the empire, and the Jewish population was made to suffer more than most through economic marginalization, restrictions on land ownership, and they were limited entry into modern professions. Anti-Semitism was, and sadly still is, a potent force in European politics and civil society. Elites and large segments of the peasantry blamed Jews for their economic hardship, particularly in their rural areas where occupations were limited and Jewish merchants and moneylenders were prominent. National political parties frequently use anti-Semitic rhetoric to rally popular support and to push for policies favoring Polish Catholics in local administration, schools, and cooperatives. As poverty increased, hundreds of thousands of Jews emigrated from Galicia during these years. Among those packing up and moving their belongings and seeking a better life elsewhere were Chaya Scheindel and Meyer Schumer. The next document I have uncovered that records events in my great-grandmother's life is from the city of The Hague, Netherlands. It is called a household card, and it records the inhabitants of every domestic residence in the city. This document revealed a lot of important information about Chaya Scheindel's new life. First is the fact that after their marriage in Rzeszów in 1913, Chaya Scheindel, Meyer, and their children moved 1,500 kilometers west to take up residence in the Netherlands. Next is that this document records 2 more children that I assume are the natural-born children of the couple. Fanny, born November 11th, 1914, and Lazar, born January 12th, 1918. Dealing first with Lazar, his birthplace is recorded as Schev, which is an abbreviation that may stand for a suburb of The Hague. But more noteworthy is the birthplace of Fanny, recorded as Leipzig. Leipzig, Germany lies about halfway on a direct line between Rzeszów, Poland, and The Hague, Netherlands. If my theory is correct, Fanny would most likely have been born on the journey from Poland to the Netherlands, in Leipzig. Also note that Chaya Scheindel Riesenbach's entry on the card has numerous mistakes. Her first name is erroneously recorded as Zelma Leah, her daughter's name, and her birth date and her birthplace are also incorrect. There is a box in the right-hand corner of the card labeled in Dutch, Movements within the municipality. In this box there is a date, October 24th, 1916, and the address, Renbaanstraat 12. Using Google Maps, I looked up this address and found what might have been the Schumer-Riesenbach home in The Hague. With this more complete information, I can now draw the family tree of my great-grandmother's second family. Finally, there is an intriguing notation in Dutch on the right-hand side of the card, which translates from the Dutch to Austrian moved to Antwerp about July 25, 1928. It would not be unusual for the immigrant Schumer-Riesenbachs to be referred to as Austrians, given that Galicia was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire up to World War I. However, the note raises another contradiction. It asserts that they left The Hague in 1928. That date is much later than the next piece of information I have on my great-grandmother's journey. In 1920, the Schumer-Riesenbach family received passports from the office of the Consul General of Holland and prepared to leave for Antwerp, Belgium. They arrived in Antwerp that year and initially settled in an apartment on Brengelmstraat 35. I know this to have happened because in 1936, the Schumer-Riesenbachs requested a permit that would enable them to settle in Antwerp permanently. This request in 1936 triggered a police investigation and report. The resulting report detailed their arrival date in 1920 and their street address. The Belgian National Archive had a copy of this detailed police report, which can be seen on your screen. This dossier contains about 10 typewritten and handwritten pages. The triggering document is dated December 9, 1936, from the Office of the Minister of Public Safety to the Office of the Police, and it requests a report on, quote, conduct, morality, social interaction, actual means of subsistence, activities and behavior of the 2 Schumer boys, Lazar and Juda. The resulting report details their employment as apprentice diamond cutters working for Zelma Leah's husband, their brother-in-law, Simon Reinhold. Simon, or Shimon in Yiddish, often went by another surname, Führer. Simon was born November 27, 1906, in Częstochowice, Poland. According to the report, Simon was a diamond cutter residing at this particular address in the city. The report found that the two boys worked long hours, were paid on commission, and had a good reputation. Apparently their earnings provided for their mother, as their father, Meyer, a former shopkeeper, was unable to work or obtain employment. The document also updates their address in Antwerp to Kroonstad 188. Using Google Maps, I have found the address, and this could well have been the Riesenbach Schumer residence in Antwerp back then. But to my mind, the most exciting find in this dossier from 1936 are photos of my great-grandmother, her husband Meyer, and 3 of their children. These photos bring to life the actual individuals who were in my extended family, rather than merely a collection of names, places, and dates. I do not know the whereabouts of Yona Symcha or Fanny Schumer during this time. There was a note in Yona Symcha's birth record asserting that he was raised by a Schumer grandmother, while Yona Symcha's mother, Chaya Scheindel, was away in Vienna. I have not turned up any information supporting this claim that Chaya Scheindel traveled to Vienna and left her child with a grandmother. This is yet another stream of inquiry that I'll need to undertake in the future. Zelma Leah married Simon Reinhold on some date that I do not yet know, and in 1937 she gave birth to a son, Jacques Henry, and in 1940 to a daughter, Paula. Even though times were hard in 1930s Belgium, I'm quite sure that these grandchildren must have brought great joy to my great-grandmother. In the 1930s, Belgium's Jewish community numbered around 70,000, many of them recent immigrants from Eastern Europe. They faced mounting challenges stemming from both the Depression and the rise of fascism in Europe. The Great Depression struck Belgium hard, causing widespread unemployment and hardship, particularly for immigrant Jews, who were often concentrated in trades like tailoring, being peddlers, and diamond cutting. The diamond industry, a significant employer of Jews, suffered during the Depression. There were efforts by local authorities to cleanse the trade of unlicensed or foreign workers, and these efforts invariably targeted Jews. The economy worsened, and the Jews were increasingly scapegoated as competitors for scarce jobs. The Belgian government implemented restrictive immigration policies in the 1930s, responding to domestic pressures and rising xenophobia. While Belgium did not enact anti-Semitic legislation similar to Germany's Nuremberg laws, Jews faced all kinds of bureaucratic obstacles to employment and residency permits. In the late 1930s, were a very precarious period for Jews in Belgium. But far worse was to come under the Nazi occupation, which began in 1940. I know virtually nothing more of Chaya Scheindel's time in Antwerp beyond this 1936 police report. When the war finally came to Antwerp, things must have turned very grim for my great-grandmother and her second family. Beginning in 1942, Jews were systematically rounded up by German forces with active collaboration from the Belgian police. The police records gathered from their 1936 request for permanent residency must have helped the authorities locate and arrest the Schumer-Riesenbach family. The main site of internment and deportation of Jews and other undesirables was the Kasterne-Dossen barracks, located halfway between Antwerp and Brussels. Over 25,000 Jews were held there before being deported by train to Auschwitz and other extermination camps. Historical documents record that prisoners suffered harsh conditions, minimal food, and cruel treatment inside the camp. I have located documents from the Belgian archives, including the one you're looking at, that provides sad proof that Chaya Scheindel and Meyer were indeed interned at the Kaserne-Dosen prison camp. From there, they were deported by train on Transport 7. The transport left Belgium in September of 1942. The transport arrived in Auschwitz-Birkenau, and it is here that the story of my great-grandmother comes to a tragic end. Documents at Yad Vashem detail that Zelma Leah, her husband and children were also murdered. But I have reason to believe that some of Chaya Scheindel and Meyer Schumer's children survived the Holocaust. Jewish Gen has a database of Jewish arrivals in Switzerland. Running a search on this database, I came across 3 intriguing names: Yona, Juda and Lazar Schumer. If these are indeed Chaya Scheindel's children, then they may have gone on to build families of their own and left descendants. I did reach out to a person I found on myheritage.com that had one of these Schumer boys in her family tree, and I asked her if we could share information about them. Unfortunately, she declined my request, but I will certainly keep trying. Also fueling my hope is a discovery through myheritage.com and billiongraves.com of a grave in Kiryat Shaul Cemetery in Israel with the inscription, translated from Hebrew, Yehuda Schumer, son of Meyer and Chava Scheindel, died 9 Shvat 5749, which corresponds to January 15th, 1989. If this is the same person as Chaya Scheindel's son, then at least one of her children with Meyer Schumer survived the war and settled in Israel. Judah may have left descendants if he started a family after emerging from the fires of the Shoah. Also intriguing is that a man by the name of Aharon Gershon completed a Yad Vashem testimony form in 1997. At the bottom of the form, near the signature line, he states that he is the grandson of Meyer Schumer. It could be that he is the child of one of Chaya Scheindel's children. However, note that Chaya Scheindel was Meyer's second wife. Meyer had children with his first wife. Thus, Aharon Gershon may have been from this other branch of the family, and I will need to investigate further. Through these and other leads, I have hope that there are survivors of Meyer and Chaya Scheindel's line who have found a safe home and have built families for themselves. I hope in the coming months to find these descendants through my ongoing genealogy research. If there are survivors from her line, then I have cousins somewhere in the world that may be able to shed more light on the story of our great-grandmother, Chaya Scheindel, the woman with 4 last names.